South Africa, for instance, is talking about an integrated transport plan. Gauteng has its own for the region. We're seeing some rail investments in Kenya. So increasingly rail is becoming strategic. Is it more strategic than road?
It plays its part. I mean, clearly road is going to be the backbone of any transport system in all African countries going forward. That's just simply because rail is less flexible than road. But if you look at what are the strategic things that rail brings to countries who have large resources and large centres of population, it's two things. If you are sitting on large resources of heavy bulk, particularly iron ore, manganese or coal, then you'll find that rail is the most efficient way of getting that out to market. And in the process you can significantly boost GDP in the process, particularly in the more undeveloped countries. And then at the other side, with the population centres, big population centres like Lagos, rail is the best way you can have of moving a lot of people around quickly. And so Lagos is looking at a metro system following Cairo, London, New York.
But increasingly there's the question of interdependence, because if we look at the rail terminal coming out of, or the coal terminal coming out of Richards Bay, the big issue is the blockage once you move into Mozambique. You need the same kind of infrastructure in order to get goods to market. It almost needs to be a concerted regional investment program.
Absolutely right. And we're seeing tremendous amount of development in Mozambique, as you know, at the moment. The TET region of Mozambique is probably sitting on the largest untapped metallurgical coal reserves in the world. And of course coking coal is required for steel making, so it's very much in demand from the Far East. And the great news there is the first rail shipment of met coal from Motiz down to Barra happened last week. I think that was widely reported, but that's the first of many. Hopefully in sort of 5 to 10 years time you'll see up to 100 million tonnes of coking coal going out to export. It'll be a significant portion of the entire world's exports, and it'll be transformational to Mozambique's growth, showing the power of rail.
Many people would argue that the provision of rail as a basic public good is the responsibility of government, and investors, private investors, would be standing on the sidelines. When we look at what's happened with RVR in Kenya, 6 syndicated loans from commercial banks and DFIs, but the shareholding base has to do with a consortium. It's not wider than that.
That's correct, and the reason for that is, I think, rail's become sort of, because of its competitive environment, its competitor is road. It requires sound commercial principles to make the most of it. And in most countries, Western type countries and increasingly African countries, concessioning has been deemed by governments to be the most efficient way of doing that. So RVR is a very good case in that. I mean, the government still is the strategic owner of that asset, but it's concessioned out that strategic asset to a set of private investors who've been able to raise funding on the back of a business plan. And then it's a volumes game. If they can grow the volumes and they can become efficient producers of, from, in this instance, Mombasa up to Nairobi and on into Uganda, more efficiently than their road counterparts, they should make a good profit on that investment.
You mentioned Nigeria earlier on, and there is a sense that in West Africa the emphasis isn't on rail, it's on road, and it's also on boosting the capacity of their ports, and that speaks obviously to oil shipments. Where does rail feature in the economy of West Africa?
Well, I think sort of you've described it very nicely for where it fits into Nigeria. I suspect most of the oil being offshore, there's less road for rail there. Rail, I think, in Nigeria is going to be very much, because it's the most densely populated African country, going to be more around how can we shift commuters around, but there is also quite a lot of natural resource in Nigeria and a lot of coal. So we'll see in the future that it's around metros, particularly in Lagos, maybe Abuja, and then coal coming out of the eastern half down into Port Harcourt. But the rest of West Africa is sitting on an enormous treasure trove of iron ore. And there's one very big project in Sierra Leone, the Tonkalili project, which is nearly, they're sitting on 12 billion tonnes of iron ore. But as you go all around the West African littoral, it literally is the biggest untapped iron ore resource in the world, and that will all, well, I say all, but nearly all of that will probably need to come back by rail. And there's a tremendous amount of activity going on there, and rail really will be the the solution to most of those export requirements.
Going back to the investment case, there is a hitch, and it's called procurement. We are starting to hear governments wanting to boost local manufacturing industries, and some of those who build locomotives and carriages are companies that you find in either the United States or Brazil, must bring the products into Africa. So the question is, how do we develop local manufacturing industries that are related to the rail sub-economy so that you have a strong enough case for it?
Look, I think if you're talking around the commodity projects, then what's going to happen there is that if you need to get that commodity out and in short order, then you are not forced, but in interest of time, you will need to go to the traditional suppliers. Over time, of course, what will happen is that the sub-supplier base will become increasingly localized, and as the experience in the localized market increases, then you'll start building up the supply base, and it will feed up the chain, and you'll get more and more local procurement coming up, and that's sort of classic GDP sort of growth and spin down of benefits.